Hello, welcome to Pursuit of Perfect System. My name is Terry Ellis. I'm an audio reviewer and a professional Dirac Live Calibrator. In this video, I'm actually at Nintronics, the excellent HiFi and AV dealership, because between them, Henley Audio, which are a UK distributor for some really fantastic brands like Klipsch, Project, Audiophiles and Jammo, they also distribute Roon Labs Nucleus products, which is the dedicated hardware for the Roon software, which most of you I'm sure are aware. But why was I at Nintronics? Well, Roon Labs CEO Enno Vandemeer was there to give a talk about Roon and some of the technologies in there and some of the things that's coming up. So I was there, I filmed it, I've tried to put together just some highlights and just some good bits to give you a bit of an insight into what happened that day. So thanks very much to Nintronics for hosting the event, and for me, thanks very much to Henley Audio for being involved. I hope you enjoy, and I'll be seeing you soon. So without further ado, Enno from Roon.
Thank you very much. Morning, everyone. Thank you for making the trek out here on Saturday morning. I'm here to tell you what I know about Roon, or some of it, but equally I'm always curious to hear how people use the gear that they have, or what they aspire to have, or understand your use cases and your pain points and what you're looking for in the world. I'll start with a bit of background. My team has been working with this in this sort of digital music space for some time. The first company that we had was called Sulus. That started in 2004, so 15 years in now. Obviously, that was a kind of a different product. It was a hardware media server in a somewhat different world. It was still very CD based at the time, so it was focused on ripping CDs. There really wasn't any streaming content available back then. And we didn't have things like tablets and smartphones and all that sort of stuff. So Sulus was a hardware system of storage units and players and touchscreen kiosks and the whole shebang. And really, the reason we made all those products was to create this user experience. We said in this transition from vinyl or CD to digital, we don't want to be looking at this kind of iTunes user interface. That was the real objection that we had as product designers. Was that we felt that, we had this sort of rich interaction with our music collections historically, and we didn't want to start looking at it in a spreadsheet-like format. It felt very clinical and not really particularly enjoyable. So the idea of Sulus was to create a user interface that was touch-based and very graphically rich, and used the cover art and all the credits and metadata from the albums that we're used to make that the way that we interacted with music. That was the principle of that product. Frankly, I think we were a little bit early with that. It was really hard to get going. We bootstrapped it, lost a ton of money. And so Sulus was acquired by Meridian at the end of 2008. And our idea at that point was, look, here's a proper audio company. Let's let them build all the boxes, because that's not really what we do. And let's let them handle distribution and that sort of thing. We'll go back to making software and try to improve that. That was the idea of that acquisition, which went well. We introduced some interesting features to the system while we were at Meridian, notably introducing Rhapsody streaming. That was the first streaming service back in 2007, 2008. So the idea was that you could have the CDs you had ripped could be in your collection, but likewise you could have streaming content. It would also be interleaved, and you could kind of go back and forth between local media and streaming content. While we were at Meridian, we were introduced to HP, who were looking for a kind of a desktop music app for their notebooks and their desktop PCs, which from a product point of view was not particularly exciting, because it wasn't really an enthusiast product at all, but it was a cool learning experience for the team, because we went from shipping 10,000 Sulus systems to 20 million PCs a year running our software. So that was taught us quite a lot about how to deploy at scale, how to support a large user base, how to manage things like software updates and whatever else in a way that was elegant and not kind of lousy. So that was sort of the last few years of Meridian. That's what we did. And then at the end of 2014, we spun out of Meridian and started an independent company, Roon Labs, with the intention of creating a new enthusiast product with everything that we had learned. Something that was going to start off as being completely software-based, something we couldn't have done in 2004 because nobody had the hardware to run this kind of software. but that was the idea. Let's make this software available. People can run it on their PC, on their NAS. They can control it with their smartphones and their tablets. It's more of a modern kind of version of what Sulus had been. What Roon is as a product, really there are kind of three sides to it. There's primarily it's a user experience. It's a way to organize your music, whether that's local files or streams or internet radio, what have you. Organize all the music that you like to listen to and give you a very rich way of browsing it based on metadata, which I'll show you in just a moment. And so that's kind of the first side of it, is how do you interact with music? That's the first problem that it solves. The second one is more sort of utilitarian. As audiophiles and music enthusiasts, we all have kit of one kind or another. The other thing that Roon does is really makes it very easy to play your music on the audio hardware that you have, whatever that might be, whether that's a USB DAC or a network streamer or whatever. We make even consumer products like Sonos devices or AirPlay devices or Chromecast, that sort of thing. We try to make it very easy to be able to make all your devices make noise in your home. That's the idea. And then the third is that we have an extensive partner program where we actually go out and work with audio manufacturers. And in the sort of our top tier program, which we call Roon Ready, that's where we actually give software to these audio manufacturers, which they then embed into their products. So their hardware devices are basically built to work with Roon right out of the box. There are now close to 80 of those partners, either with products in the market or products coming. So that ecosystem is growing. That streaming protocol is unlike AirPlay and Chromecast and the sort of, the protocols that the consumer protocols that you may be familiar with. The focus is very much on high resolution streaming and on rich two-way control between the Roon app and that hardware. So for example, if you adjust the volume in your app, and the hardware supports it, that hardware volume will change, or things like audio settings, input settings, those will all change and be reflected in the app. I'm going to give you a quick tour. Actually, before I do that, can I get a show of hands of who uses Roon or has used Roon? Or wow, okay, good. Well, that's good. Then some of what I'm going to show you here, you will know already, or maybe you'll discover a tip or two. I'm going to pick this album because this album has all kinds of interesting characteristics. So this album is a folder full of FLACs on the SSD in this laptop, right? So it's in my library. It's where I ripped it or whatever. All the information you see about the album, Roon has added to it. So none of this is in the tags for this album. All we have is files with track names maybe. So the first thing that Roon does is it looks at your content, whether it's files or streams, and identifies it and goes out to our cloud service and pulls down all this additional information. So you'll see here we've got I'm going to try to do this dance here, point and scroll at the same time. We've got a review of the album. Down here you can see in the track listing, you'll notice it's not just track title, but we're actually pulling out when we have interesting information. For example, a guest artist here. We've got Justin Timberlake as a guest performer on this track. We've pulled that out and displayed it right in the track listing. The idea is to surface insights about the music that are very relevant, but not to overwhelm you with information, because if we look at that track, if we say view credits, we actually have quite a lot of information about everyone who performed on that track and who produced it, who engineered it. This is kind of overkill. Unless you're looking for it, then it's great that we have it, but really you wouldn't want this view to be, the one thing you want to know here is that there's a guest artist on that track, and it's Justin Timberlake, and there you go. We put it in the track listing. So the album I was showing you is an album by Pharrell Williams. All this biographical information about him as an artist and as a composer and as a producer, none of this was obviously in those files. This is all data that Roon has added. So here we've got biography, bands that he's been a member of, where and when he was born, links to his social media and website and whatever else. Here's the one album that we have by Pharrell that I have on this laptop. And here are 4 other albums on which he appears, either as a guest performer or composer or producer. He has some credit on those albums. Now, I happen to know that because I happen to know all of this music, but you might not know that unless you had read the liner notes to all these albums or you were a die-hard fan. So the idea is we're trying to enable the kinds of experiences that you don't know unless you're a super fan. So those are his appearances. Then we have production credits separately. And now here's where it gets interesting. Roon allows you to, it integrates with Tidal and Qobuz, the two lossless streaming services or high-res streaming services. So I have the one album by Pharrell and the few that he produced and appeared on, but here's everything else that's available on Tidal and on Qobuz that's connected to him in any way as an artist or as a composer. So we have his main albums, his singles and EPs, but then down here, we've got the 11 albums that he did with Snoop Dogg and the 6 with Jay-Z, and you see, these have all been kind of categorized because we ingest the whole catalog from Tidal and Qobuz every day. So we've kind of pre-computed all the links between this artist and everything they have. What we are trying to solve here is what in the industry we refer to as the tyranny of choice with streaming, where you've got 40, 50 million tracks available, and you don't necessarily know where to start if you fire up the Tidal app or the Spotify app or whatever. It's a lot to deal with. So our idea is that you have some music that you know and love. Let's use that as the starting point, the lens through which you view those 40,000 tracks. Now, or 40 million tracks rather. I'm not going to see all 40 million. I'm going to see the ones that are relevant to me based on the music that I've already collected. We think it's a more interesting and productive way to explore, to make use of streaming and discover new content. Our system of looking at related artists, whether they're collaborators or influences or followers, Roon breaks all of those out. And again, everything is a link. So if I say Pharrell's influenced by Prince, I go to Prince, and now I'm looking at all of his biographical data and everything that he's ever worked on. These genres also are links. So I could go from Prince to R&B, for example, and now I'm looking at R&B, but through the lens of my library again. This is a collage here of R&B albums that are my albums in my library. So when I say shuffle R&B, that's going to be shuffle the R&B that I've collected, right? It's not just everything in a streaming service. It's what's most relevant to me. So you can see here that we have some artist highlights and some album highlights, but then we can also drill down. So we can go from R&B into soul, and from soul to, what's interesting, to Motown. So we can sort of traverse all these subgenres in a way that's very sensitive to the way the music collector thinks. It's not just, here's all your rock and here's all your jazz, and it's generally not that simple for an enthusiast. So what we try to do is to have both active and passive experiences available always. You could say, just shuffle me Motown, or you could go through and pick through the featured Motown artists one by one, depending on your bent. I mean, in my house, my wife will click shuffle, and I will nerd out and hunt and peck and find exactly the track that I want to hear. We try to serve both use cases very well. I want to touch quickly on our approach to classical music, which is, historically sort of woefully underserved, both in physical media and certainly in digital playback, because classical music doesn't fit neatly into the artist album track hierarchy that serves pop and rock and jazz very well. Obviously, the classical listener tends to think more from the starting point of composer and then to composition or work and then performance of that work, and that performance may have conductor and soloist and ensemble, who knows. It's a much more complex data model. So browsing classical music in Roon uses that exact model. It starts from composer. So here, for example, I could go to Beethoven, and we're going to see the same type of biographical information that you would see for an artist for a composer. So here we're looking at here's Beethoven, where and when he was born and died. And here are a list, not of albums or tracks, but of his compositions, his works. So I can click on Moonlight Sonata, for example. Here we're looking at. And here we see a description of the sonata, not of a recording of it, but of the sonata itself and why it's relevant in the canon and how it relates to Beethoven's other works. the movements that make it up, the year it was composed, instrumentation, form. None of this data makes any sense in the world of pop or rock or jazz or country or anything like that. But for classical, it's critical. So we have all this additional data available for classical, and we use it for browsing. So here we're looking at the Moonlight. These are the performances that I have on my laptop of the Moonlight Sonata. So I have 3 different ones. If I go to the Horowitz, for example, now I'm looking at the album, and you can see the 3 tracks that make up the 3 movements of the Moonlight are highlighted and grouped. So with one click, I can put all 3 movements into my queue, and I can listen to them in the way that I think of listening to them. They're not tracks, they're 3 movements of a composition.
So if you didn't have that on your computer, that particular album, it would go hunt.
Well, actually, yes, that's an excellent question. So I just happened to go to the Horowitz, was it?
Because I saw that Tidal had come up with 1739.
Right, and so
currencies.
What's interesting about that is, if you open the Tidal app, I defy you to find the 1700 performances of Moonlight Sonata. It's impossible, because their app is just not designed to do that. So that's one of the things that we've tried to do here. We're on our current release. One of the sort of the hot button topics is to solve this mess that you're looking at right here. I have to disclaim this. In cases where Tidal has 1700 performances of a work, like they do in this case, this gets really, really cluttered, and we're improving that. It's a bit embarrassing, so I apologize, but there's a fix in the works for that. There's another thing going on at the moment, which is when you have 1700 performances of anything, understanding which one you want to listen to is a challenge in and of itself. So what we're doing right now is we're applying some new machine learning models that we've developed to determine popularity and quality, if you will, to say, look, I don't know the Moonlight. I'd like to check it out. What performance what recording do I listen to? You can go do a Google search and read for half an hour to come to a conclusion of, maybe narrow it down to 3 or whatever. But that's one of the things we're working on, is to show you if there's a definitive recording of a particular composition. Let's put that first and give you that as a starting point. You can explore the other 1699, but we'll give you that one to start with. So this what I'm showing here is what Roon can do in terms of getting you access to. It would be hard to find all these performances. In Tidal, everything's sorted by artist, album, track. So it's very hard to find, certainly, the classical music that you're looking for. We have this screen called Discover. The idea here is, we've had this feedback time and time again over the years. People, particularly collectors, have amassed these collections of music. They have favorites within them, but very often, just because of whether it's the size of the digital media or the physical media, or the fact that it's hard to reach the digital media, you forget where your favorites are. You get kind of disconnected from your music collection. We designed this screen to kind of reconnect you, to give you some serendipity, to surface insights about your own music collection. So did you know that, for example, here's we've got a featured artist or a featured composition released this month in 1993. Okay, this is calling a featured collaboration between Miles Davis Quintet and Chick Corea. It's not entirely accurate, but the idea is valid, that you've got 2 artists from your collection who have collaborated on a particular track. We're going to pull that out and sort of surface it as an insight. The kind of thing that you would only know if you had read every liner note to every album. So this is, again, to enhance your listening experience, to give you jumping off points to explore your own collection or to go beyond your own collection. Sometimes I sit down and I know exactly what I want to listen to. I know exactly what 3 things I want to listen to and in what order. But that's not always the case. Sometimes I just need a happy accident to get me started. So these kinds of features are designed with that in mind. So here we're looking at all the albums. I mean, this is a small library in this laptop. It's 650 albums. But what I'm going to do is, with focus, I could say genre. Show me all the jazz. Right? It's basically a set of filters. So now I'm looking at all the jazz albums. But I could also say, show me all the jazz from the 1970s. And now I've gone from looking at 650 albums, which admittedly is not that many, to looking at exactly the, whatever this is, 10 or so, that are the ones that I'm looking for at this moment. This you can get that's a very simple one, genre and decade. You can get very tricky with it. For example, I could say, I want composer, let's say composer George Gershwin, and performer Frank Sinatra. Okay, those are the two albums that I have where Sinatra's singing Gershwin songs. Right, so this works not only for classical, but you can use it any which way you can imagine slicing and dicing. Likewise, to your point earlier, if you want to say, show me only the MQA content, or only the DSD 256 content, or only the PCM 192, whatever it is, you can get to exactly what it is. So I want to see only my high-resolution jazz, for example.
How many million people have you got editing all of this?
Now, we license most of that content from 6 or 7 different sources. So the metadata, the IP that we provide really is to take all those data sources and interleave them. So when, for example, the All Music Guide is one of the data sources that we use. They have the notion of an artist. So Miles Davis in the All Music Guide may come with a biography and a discography and some other information, maybe where and when he was born and died and that sort of stuff. Music Brains, which is another data source that we use, also has the notion of a Miles Davis, but there's no link between those two, aside from the fact that their names are spelled the same. So we have quite a lot of, we have a system to import those different data sources and connect them all so that we can make sure that this Miles Davis is that, Miles Davis is that. And when they're not the same, that we've disambiguated them appropriately, and we've said, this is one Robert Smith and this is another Robert Smith, and they're different people. So that's really the layer that we add, is to bring it all in. And the way our system is designed is that our ambition is to add more and more data sources as time go on. So when we launched Roon, I don't believe we had concerts in the very first version. But right now, I'll show you if we go. They will appear here. Oh, here we go. So Pharrell has concerts coming up, these two right here. That's not something we had in the original version, but we made an arrangement with Songkick where we can pull in that data. And that's something that we intend to expand over time. Our idea here, from a product design point of view, is that listening to music is obviously that's job one. But the context in which you explore that music or learn about it or find similar music, that's where all the richness comes from. We're not in the business of making all this equipment to make the music sound great. There are lots of other companies that do that. We're just trying to get you to the music and give you an interesting context in which to explore it and listen to it, that sort of thing. So when I'm listening to Miles Davis, I might want to read his bio at the same time. It happens that I've read countless times, so that's maybe not relevant. But the point is that having that additional information is useful while you're listening. I made reference earlier to this machine learning work that we've been doing. This has been sort of a skunk works that we've been working on for a year and a half or so now. The idea is we want to be able to make interesting recommendations from outside of your library. We want to be able to do things like let you play one track or one album or something like that, and let Roon continue to play relevant music for you. But significantly, we wanted that to embrace the whole world of streaming content. So if I play this, whatever track I just played, I played below, from my local library, I want to be able to hear the next track that I want to hear, something relevant that I don't maybe own, that's related to this or similar to this or whatever, that isn't from my library. So to do that, we had to build a machine learning model that started to understand Spotify has been pioneering this for quite some time. How do you figure out similarity between tracks, and how do you create these interesting connections? So our first application of this machine learning technology that we've developed is in a feature that we call Roon Radio, which does what I just described. No matter where you start playing music, it will play more music for you. So you can use an artist as a starting point, a track, an album, a genre, whatever, and Roon will just pick music from there. One of the reasons, the feedback that we've had is that it works extremely well. And one of the reasons for that is that when you design some machine learning model, that model has to be trained with data, with usage data from ostensibly real people, so that it can learn what's a good choice and what's a bad choice. So that model, you may say, looking out for all these characteristics, and here's the algorithm, but now you need to show it what 1 million people did when they picked their own music. What's interesting is that because our users are all basically expert listeners to one degree or another, we're all serious enthusiasts, collectors, we know our genres very, very well, our training data is outstanding. It's much, much better than what a mass market streaming service has, because on a Spotify or Apple Music, you may get a lot of people who go listen to the latest Taylor Swift single, but that's not great training data. Our listeners will say, I know hard bop jazz and that's my thing, and I'm going to plumb the corners of that subgenre really extensively. That's now training data for us and allows us to make recommendations to other users who are interested in learning about hard bop. So we have some advantages there, and it seems to be working very well. That technology is something that we're now deploying elsewhere in the product, so that everywhere you go there are always more recommendations, and that's kind of a thematic departure that we've made from here's your music and here's a way to play it. It's also a mechanism for discovery. Create a link between Bob Marley and the Wailers, which are two distinct artists in the world of data, but in our minds probably not so much. So we'll have a mechanism to show those, to display those together and interleave them, as opposed to saying this is artist A and artist B. That's not really how our brains work, even though the data is more accurate that way. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's the core value proposition of what Roon does on the playback side, is that all of your devices, basically, if you, for example, the easiest way, you take a Nucleus home, you plug it in, it starts up, it asks you really only one thing: where's your music, right? And what's your title login, your Cobuzz login, that sort of thing. But it scans your network, and it shows you a list of every device that's compatible with Roon on your network, and it lets you enable them. So I want the Apple TV in the kids' playroom, and I want the Sonos on the kitchen counter, and I want the DCS streamer in the living room.
It's kind of seamless. You could just pick up your phone in the kitchen and go buh, 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 and it will control the whole lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
But what we did with the Nucleus that's a bit unique is that we said having done the whole Sulus thing, where we sourced components from all over creation and learned about the horrors of supply chain from doing that. What we did with Nucleus is we said, this is a partnership with Intel, we're using their NUC platform, hence the name. That is you couldn't ask for a steadier semiconductor supplier in the world, and this is a long life platform that's constantly getting the latest generation of their silicon. So the first version that we shipped of that, whatever that is, 2 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, about 18 months, 2 years.
It was using a CPU that's 4 generations older than the current one that we ship today, because working with Intel allows us to do that. We get the latest, greatest. But it means that we're not sourcing crazy components from crazy suppliers. There's one component in there, it comes from Intel, that's that. So what we've done is we've built the operating system for it, which is just a lightweight Linux that's been tuned down to do nothing but file I/O, network I/O, and whatever is necessary for the DSP and transcoding. So everything else has been shut down.
No other functions going on like
So exactly. So no one's checking email. There's no shenanigans going on. It's only doing the Roon stuff.
Yeah.
So we call that Roon OS, unimaginatively enough. But that's the sort of unique selling proposition of that box. All of its horsepower, which is the latest, greatest that Intel has, is doing Roon stuff.